The US just made a major power play, changing the face of the Russia-Ukraine war forever. It's decided to share intelligence with Ukraine about long-range targets within Russia, effectively helping Kyiv's forces destroy even more of the Kremlin's infrastructure. It's a bold and decisive move, one that will inevitably trigger a chain reaction with far-reaching ramifications, and it might in the end be the move that crushes Russia once and for all. Here's a full breakdown of what happened and what it means moving forward. On October 1st, reports from numerous media outlets, including Reuters and the Wall Street Journal, confirmed that the US government has authorized its intelligence agencies, as well as the Pentagon, to help Ukraine target and take out Russian energy infrastructure locations. Insider officials revealed that Kyiv will receive US intelligence about Russia's oil refineries, pipelines, and power stations far beyond the borders with Ukraine. In other words, America is about to make it dramatically easier for Ukraine to launch its drones and missiles at the core pieces that power Russia's energy industry and prop up its economy. The enormity of this decision cannot be overstated. Those who have been following the war closely will already know how Ukraine has been regularly targeting Russian energy infrastructure in recent weeks and months. On numerous occasions, reports have revealed how Ukraine's long-range drone attacks have dealt damage to Russia's oil refineries, pipelines, fuel depots, and storage facilities. It's taken time for Russia to feel the effects, and Ukraine has had to be patient, picking and choosing its targets with care and carrying out its plans to perfection, choosing the right times and the right locations to strike in order to deal maximum damage, all while withstanding regular frontline assaults and nightly bombardments from its enemies. But the impact of Kyiv strikes is finally being felt in a major way. Recent statistics from September 28 show that around 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been taken offline thanks to Ukraine's drone attacks. That's the equivalent of around 338,000 tons of oil a day, with gasoline output dropping by 1 million tons in total. And around 70% of that, or 236,000 tons a day, is a direct result of Ukrainian drone strikes, according to analytics agency Ciala. Now, Russia's domestic fuel market no longer has enough supply to meet demand. In fact, it's about 20% short of meeting the country's needs, and the Russian people are feeling the heat. In an increasing number of regions around the country, shortages are being reported and prices are skyrocketing, with some members of the public even having to turn to black market suppliers just to get the fuel they need to survive. According to Russian economist Vladislav Inozemtsev, more than 300 independent fuel retailers have been forced to shut down since May as a direct result of Ukraine's actions. Others are being forced to take drastic measures to remain open, like limiting consumers to small amounts of fuel per purchase, banning people from filling up gas cans, or even restricting access to loyal card-holding customers only. And this crisis is only getting worse as the days go by. Indeed, the latest reports from Russia reveal that Moscow is now preparing to impose restrictions on diesel exports, following the gasoline export ban imposed earlier this year. Supply issues are also increasing, with even major cities like Nizhny Novgorod, the sixth biggest city in Russia, suffering the effects. In certain locations, drivers are having to wait in lines that are more than 100 cars long, with some forced to queue up overnight so they have the fuel they need to get to work and back the next day. And this isn't just affecting Russia's western regions or occupied territories of Ukraine. Even in the Far East, literally thousands of miles from the front lines of the conflict, Russian citizens are finding fuel increasingly hard to acquire, and a local governor, Alexei Maslov, has issued an urgent call for people to stop panic buying. This fuel crisis doesn't just affect everyday people either. It has a direct impact on the Kremlin's war machine too, making it much more difficult for Russia to transport troops and supplies from place to place and keep its military logistics flowing smoothly. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, confirmed this on September 25, stating, "The capabilities of the enemy's military-industrial complex have been significantly reduced. We can see this on the battlefield. This is a fuel crisis in Russia, which directly affects logistics and the supply of its army." Even on the Russian side, staunch Kremlin supporters and nationalist figures can no longer hide from the harsh reality of the situation. Maxim Kalishnikov, a well-known propagandist, recently admitted, "I can state that the situation is deteriorating. The fuel crisis is developing now. The voices of those who say that they have to switch to ration consumption using coupons, basically fuel cards, are becoming louder and louder. Meanwhile, at the highest level, in the halls of the Kremlin itself, government officials are scrambling to find solutions to the problem. Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak has been working on plans to waive import duties on fuel from Asian nations like China and South Korea, as well as reintroducing an octane-boosting additive that was actually banned in 2016 in a desperate attempt to stretch the domestic supply. Russia is also banking on Belarus to provide additional fuel imports in the coming days and weeks to make up for its production problems, and purchases from Belarus are already up to 36% compared to the previous year. Kremlin officials also continue to tell the public that everything is fine, with Novak recently claiming that the situation is under control. But the facts and stats of the situation paint a very different picture, and the Russian people aren't blind. They may face Kremlin-led propaganda on their TVs and the increasingly limited array of websites they're allowed to visit, but they can also see with their own eyes that the prices of fuel and other everyday essential goods are rising by the day, and that their country's economy is growing weaker and weaker, and it's not set to improve anytime soon. Indeed, Russia's finance ministry has recently proposed increasing value-added tax (VAT) from 20 to 22% in 2026 in order to generate an estimated 1.3 trillion rubles or $15.5 billion each year. Officials feel that this is a necessary step to help make up some of Russia's massive federal budget deficit, which reached a staggering 4.88 trillion rubles or $61.1 billion between January and July of this year. However, the fact of the matter is that even if Russia does find a few short-term fixes for its financial and fuel problems, it's not going to be able to magically undo all of this damage to its economy and energy industry. It faces major problems at a deep structural level, and it's all thanks to Ukraine's sound strategic decisions to find and take out the targets that matter the most. And Ukraine has done all of that more or less on its own. Of course, it's had plenty of support from Western allies, but it's had to use its own intelligence and its own resources to identify Russia's energy infrastructure targets and plan attacks on those targets, most often using its own domestic drones to deal the damage. Despite having to deal with almost constant Russian drone and missile attacks, as well as digging in along the front lines to keep Kremlin troops out of important locations like the Donetsk city of Pokrovsk, Ukraine's forces have somehow found the time and capacity to dismantle Russia's oil industry. According to the Kyiv Post, there were at least 21 attacks on Russian oil refineries between August 1st and September 19, with some of those facilities struck twice or even 3 times in that relatively brief span of time. September alone saw 4 major facilities hit, including the Kyiv Kyiv plant in the Leningrad region, which is the second biggest refinery in all of Russia, plus the Rosneft Ryazan refinery, which is one of the top 5 largest of its kind. Both of those facilities had to shut down in the wake of Ukraine's attacks. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky summed up how important it is to keep hitting the Russian oil industry, stating, "The most effective sanctions, the ones that work the fastest, are the fires at Russia's oil refineries, its terminals, oil depots. We've significantly restricted Russia's oil industry, and this significantly restricts the war." Now, just imagine how much more effective Ukraine could be and how much more damage it could deal to Russian oil with US intelligence on its side. After all, the United States does not only boast the strongest military force in the world by far, but also leads the way when it comes to intelligence. It has the means and experience to gather intel in the most effective, efficient, and precise ways possible, and this has given it an all-important advantage when carrying out countless military missions in the past. Ukraine has already benefited from US intelligence in the war so far, but America has only provided intel in relation to battlefield situational awareness within Ukraine's borders in contested territories like Donetsk and Luhansk. It hasn't yet given Kyiv any data about locations within Russia, but that's all about to change, and one official told the Wall Street Journal that agencies are now just waiting for the final written approval from the White House before releasing data to the Ukrainian military. That approval could come at any time, meaning that Ukraine could be just days or even hours away from receiving its biggest intelligence boost of the war so far. And that's not all. The US is also said to be urging NATO allies to follow its example and share their own intelligence with Kyiv too. All of a sudden, Ukrainian forces might find themselves with massive amounts of new, valuable information about key targets deep in Russian territory. At that point, the tide of battle will inevitably turn in Ukraine's favor. With fresh intelligence, Ukraine's forces should become even more efficient and even deadlier when it comes to picking their targets, planning attacks, and executing their strategies. They could wipe countless more oil and fuel-related targets off the map, crippling the energy industry even further, worsening the fuel shortages, and quite literally setting Russia on fire, leaving the Kremlin in a state of chaos and catastrophe with no answers and no way out. Russia, meanwhile, which has already shown major frailty and struggled to repel Ukraine's drones so far, would inevitably have an even harder time predicting Kyiv's moves and taking the necessary actions to safeguard its energy infrastructure if it has to counterattack not just Ukrainian intelligence but US and NATO intel as well. This move should also strike fear into the heart of Vladimir Putin himself, because it's the biggest sign yet that the US, under President Trump, has massively shifted its stance on the war. Prior to this point, Trump had mainly wanted to focus on ending the war through diplomatic negotiations, meeting with both Putin and Zelensky, and attempting to broker a deal in which Ukraine ceded some of its territories. He spoke about Russia keeping hold of Crimea, for example, and argued that Ukraine would need to sacrifice other regions, such as Donetsk and Luhansk, in order to stop the conflict. In recent weeks, however, everything has changed. Trump is said to have grown increasingly angry and frustrated with Putin, and is now distancing himself from the Russian leader, preferring instead to pledge his support to Ukraine. Early in September, the administration approved a major weapons and aid package for Kyiv, which was to be funded by NATO nations. Then on September 23, Trump dropped a bombshell on his social media site, Truth Social, stating that Ukraine could recover all of the land lost to Russia over the course of the war so far. After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it's causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. The US president went on to call Russia a paper tiger in his post, criticizing the country for fighting aimlessly and pledging further US support for NATO and Ukraine. With Trump now willing to share intelligence with Kyiv too, it appears he's tired of talking and ready to take bold, significant steps towards ending this war by whatever means necessary. There's just one problem. Even with US intelligence on its side, Ukraine still needs the necessary weapons to carry out long-range deep strikes on Russian infrastructure. Its drones have proven effective to a point, but it can't necessarily deal the kind of serious lasting damage that will truly bring the Kremlin to its knees. It also still has to cope with restrictions and limitations about how it uses some of the weapons supplied by its Western allies. The US, for example, demands that Ukrainian forces request approval every time they want to fire an ATACMS missile at a Russian target, and new deliveries of ATACMS have been blocked for some time. Ukraine also lacks the sort of missiles it needs to strike targets that are hundreds of miles beyond its borders, since its ally-supplied ATACMS and Storm Shadows can only go so far. However, that too may be about to change, because the US isn't just gearing up to share intelligence with Ukraine, it's also considering supplying Kyiv with some of the most powerful cruise missiles known to man, Tomahawks. Famed for their remarkable range, Tomahawk missiles can travel distances of up to 1,000 miles to strike their targets. While Ukraine is working on its long-range missiles like the Flamingo and Long Neptune, it doesn't yet have the infrastructure in place to produce them in large quantities, so cannot currently plan too many deep strikes on Russian soil. If it suddenly received a big batch of Tomahawks, however, it could instantly get to work identifying important energy targets hundreds of miles into Russia, including those in the Moscow area and beyond, and take them out with staggering precision and immense firepower. Because Tomahawks don't just have amazing range, they're incredibly agile too, capable of reaching peak speeds of around 570 miles an hour and carrying out evasive maneuvers in the air to avoid enemy interceptors. Following low-altitude flight paths to avoid detection by enemy radars and air defense systems, they're remarkably effective at hitting their targets, and each one has the capacity to carry high-explosive warheads weighing up to 1,000 pounds. So, when these missiles make impact, they have the power to turn entire structures into nothing but dust and rubble. Airfields, ammo depots, oil refineries, fuel storage facilities, all of these types of targets have no way of withstanding a direct strike from a Tomahawk missile, and there's years of evidence to back that up. since Tomahawks have been used by the US in conflicts dating back to the early 1990s. They've taken out countless targets in countries like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria. And very soon, the same may happen in Russia, with US Vice President J.D. Vance telling Fox News in a September 28 interview,
"It's something the president's going to make the final determination on. What the president is going to do is what's in the best interest of the United States of America."
Vance later added,
"I know that we're having conversations this very minute about that issue."
While no final decision has yet been made, it's clear that the US is strongly considering providing Kyiv with Tomahawks or perhaps Barracuda missiles, which also boast impressive subsonic flight speeds and extended ranges of up to 580 miles. Germany too has pledged more long-range weapon support to Ukraine, and once Kyiv gets its hands on these weapons, with American intelligence to guide them, its forces will be almost unstoppable. Fully armed and fully informed, they'll have everything they need to hit Russia where it hurts most, striking the most valuable, important locations, taking out one piece of energy infrastructure after another, and from that point on, a whole chain reaction of events is likely to take place. More attacks will occur on energy locations across Russia, which will cause oil production capacities to decrease even more. This should have knock-on effects on both the economy, which will weaken further, and the Russian public, who will see their quality of life and spending power diminish. Resentment and frustration towards the Kremlin will inevitably increase as the people seek someone to blame, and eventually even the oligarchs and nationalists who have stood by Putin all this time may decide that enough is enough, turning on the president at long last. At that point, even Putin, who's made so many bold proclamations about Ukraine belonging to Russia and shown almost no real inclination to stop the war, may be forced to admit defeat and sit down at the negotiating table to bring this bloody battle to an end. Now, learn more about the possibility of US Tomahawk missiles being sent to Ukraine in our recent video, detailing the incredible technical specifications and proven track record of these weapons in action. Or to get a better idea of how difficult life is getting for Putin, check out this video detailing how even some of the Kremlin's biggest supporters and pro-Putin nationalists have slowly but surely started to turn on their president. And finally, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications too, so you can be among the first in the world to find out about the latest big news and developments from this war and other major military conflicts worldwide.